Berlin, June 1945. The city lay in ruins, the air thick with the smell of soot and dust. Against this apocalyptic backdrop, Marshal Georgy Zhukov steps up to the microphones, his face showing nothing but cold impenetrability. The entire war-weary world awaits one thing: official confirmation of the death of its arch-enemy. But instead, a statement is made that would shatter public consciousness. We have not found a corpse that could be identified as Hitler's. He could very well have flown out of Berlin at the very last moment. At the very moment Zhukov was uttering these words, in a secret laboratory of Soviet counterintelligence in the Buk district, experts were already holding irrefutable evidence in their hands. The charred but perfectly recognizable dental prostheses and a fragment of Adolf Hitler's jaw. The Kremlin knew the truth, but the world was told something else.
This was not a mistake or a result of confusion. It was an order. Thus began one of the most secret and long-running operations of World War II, an operation codenamed Myth. The main question of our investigation is not what happened to the Führer in his bunker. We know his life ended there. The main mystery is different. Why did those who first found his body release the virus of a lie about his escape into the world? What game was Stalin playing? And what incredible journey did the remains of the defeated dictator undertake after his death? This is not a story of salvation, but of an abduction that lasted a quarter of a century and ended with an act so secret that the truth only surfaced after the collapse of an entire empire.
To understand the drama of those days, we must descend into the very heart of darkness, the Führer bunker. It was not just a fortified headquarters, but a veritable concrete tomb, built even before its principal occupant had decided to end his life there. A two-level monster dug 9 meters deep into the damp Berlin soil. Walls 4 meters thick, a roof capable of withstanding a direct hit from the most powerful aerial bomb. Its own generator, an air filtration system, and artesian well, and pumps working day and night to drain the water. An engineering marvel hiding an inhumane atmosphere. The air here was stale and heavy, saturated with the smell of concrete, diesel fuel, and human fear. Moisture seeped down the walls, and the monotonous hum of machinery provided a maddening soundtrack to the agony of an entire regime. From outside came the muffled, visceral thuds of shell explosions, as if someone were knocking on the lid of a giant sarcophagus. It was a place created to preserve life, but doomed to kill the soul.
It was here, on January 16, 1945, that Adolf Hitler finally moved in to spend his last 105 days. His world had shrunk to 30 cramped rooms connected by narrow corridors. In his modestly furnished apartment, only a portrait of Frederick the Great, his idol, in whose stubbornness he vainly sought solace, hung on the wall. The nerve center of the underworld was the map room, where military briefings were held, increasingly resembling a theater of the absurd. Generals with ashen faces reported on the movements of armies that existed only on paper. And the Führer himself, his hands trembling from Parkinson's disease, moved flags of non-existent divisions under the influence of a cocktail of drugs administered by his personal physician.
He was not alone in this concrete crypt. By his side was his eternal companion, Eva Braun, vainly trying to create a semblance of coziness among the furniture salvaged from the bombed-out chancellery. In the final weeks, Joseph Goebbels, his wife Magda, and their 6 children also moved in. Their carefree laughter echoed through the corridors, unaware of the fate being prepared for them. The all-powerful secretary Martin Bormann, adjutants, secretaries. They all became prisoners of the underground fortress, locked in with the disintegrating mind of their leader. Their lives followed a ghostly, somnambulant rhythm. Sleepless nights filled with hysterical monologues, short, restless sleep at dawn, rare walks with his beloved shepherd dog, Blondie, in the garden, pockmarked with craters. Fear grew with every hour, fear not only of the advancing Soviet troops, but also of the unpredictable outbursts of rage from the one who had doomed them to this fate.
By the end of April 1945, the war had arrived right at the doorstep of the concrete shelter. Or rather, above it. Soviet artillery was firing directly on the government quarter. Every explosion shook the walls, sending cement dust raining from the ceiling. The circle had closed. The Führer, who had dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich, found himself locked in a few underground rooms while the world he had created crumbled above his head. The end came on April 29th, in the first hours after midnight, marked by two final, sinisterly symbolic acts. First, the wedding. In a small conference room, in the presence of Goebbels, Berman, and a few secretaries, Adolf Hitler married Eva Braun. The ceremony was like a grotesque play, a bureaucrat trembling with fear, witnesses signing the marriage contract, and a modest champagne banquet during which the groom lost himself in grim recollections of the past. The woman who had remained in the shadows for years became Frau Hitler for the last few hours.
Immediately after, he withdrew to dictate his political and personal testament to his secretary. This document was the final chord of his life, full of self-justification, hatred, and paranoia. He blamed international Jewry for the unleashed slaughter, cursed the comrades who had betrayed him, and appointed a new German government headed by Admiral Dönitz. In his personal will, he coldly stated he and his wife were choosing to leave this life to avoid the shame of capitulation. The next day, April 30, afternoon, the farewells were said. Hitler and Eva Braun came out into the corridor to say goodbye to their inner circle. The handshakes were brief and silent. Those present could not hold back their tears, but the Führer's own face remained an impenetrable mask. Then the couple withdrew to their private quarters.
A few minutes later, around 3:30, a single muffled shot was heard from behind the door. The adjutants, after waiting a few moments, entered. The scene was silent and eloquent. Hitler was slumped on the sofa, with a gunshot wound to his right temple. Next to him lay Eva Braun, her face showing no visible injuries. She had taken cyanide. 2 pistols lay on the floor. What followed unfolded with the precision of a grim ritual. The bodies, wrapped in blankets, were carried up the narrow staircase into the garden and placed in a shell crater. They were doused with gasoline, more than 200 liters. A tossed match created a huge pillar of flame and black smoke that soared over the ruins of Berlin. It seemed that in this fire, it was not just the lives of 2 people that were burning, but an entire era of madness and violence.
But the tragedy of the bunker did not end there. A day later, on May 1st, Joseph and Magda Goebbels carried out their monstrous decision. They killed their 6 children by administering morphine and then crushing ampules of cyanide in their mouths. Afterwards, the couple went up into the garden and also took their own lives. The remaining inhabitants of the underworld either followed their example or, like Martin Bormann, made a desperate and nearly suicidal attempt to break out of the encircled city. The bunker, until recently buzzing with feverish activity, fell silent. It stood empty, transformed into a cold, damp tomb full of evidence, corpses, and unspoken secrets. It awaited its new masters, and they were not long in coming. On May 2, 1945, soldiers of the Soviet counterintelligence agency, SMERSH, entered the deserted Führer bunker. They did not find merely an abandoned shelter, but a preserved tableau of the apocalypse. In the garden, amidst craters and rubble, lay the charred bodies of Joseph Goebbels and his wife. And nearby, in another crater, two barely recognizable, severely burned corpses. Interrogated German guards stated for the record these were Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. Thus began the top-secret investigation, codenamed Operation Myth. Every step of it was personally controlled by Stalin. The remains were secretly transported to a laboratory in Berlin's Buch district, where a meticulous identification process began. The key piece of evidence was the teeth. Hitler's dental condition was a nightmare for any doctor, a multitude of fillings, bridges, and gold crowns. But for forensics experts, it was an invaluable gift.
Soviet operatives located the assistant of the Führer's personal dental technician, Kathy Heusermann. When shown the prostheses extracted from the charred skull, she stated without a shadow of a doubt, "Yes, these are the Führer's teeth." Her words were cross-referenced with X-rays of Hitler's skull taken after the 1944 assassination attempt. The match was 100%. The investigators had no remaining doubts. They had found what they were looking for. A detailed report was sent to Moscow, and here occurred the turn that would define one of the most enduring conspiracy theories of the 20th century for decades. Instead of announcing their triumph to the world, Stalin ordered all materials classified and launched a grand campaign of disinformation. This decision had three cynical and calculated reasons, revealing the very essence of Stalinist political thinking.
First, geopolitics. The Cold War had not been officially declared, but its contours were already emerging. A living Hitler became the perfect tool for blackmail. It allowed him to keep the Western allies on edge, accuse them of sheltering Nazis, and justify the need for a massive Soviet military presence in Eastern Europe, ostensibly to catch the hiding enemy. Second, domestic policy. The end of the war required a new unifying idea. The eternally lurking, unfinished fascism became the perfect justification for tightening the regime, a new wave of repression and total control over society. As long as the main enemy was at large, the people had to remain vigilant. And finally, the third and perhaps the most important reason, personal vengeance. Stalin didn't just want to defeat Hitler. He wanted to humiliate him, to erase him, to deprive him even of the certainty of his end. He stole from his enemy not only his life, but death itself, leaving him in history as a ghost, a creature stuck between being and non-being.
And while Marshal Zhukov was reading his sensational statement about a possible escape, and Stalin, at the Potsdam Conference, with an imperturbable expression, assured the Allies that the Führer was hiding in Spain or Argentina, the real remains were already packed into wooden ammunition crates. Their strange and grim odyssey was beginning, one that would last a quarter of a century and become one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Soviet Union. From this moment on, the evidence became a problem that needed to be securely hidden. The remains of Hitler, Eva Braun, and the Goebbels family, packed in crude ammunition boxes, began their ghostly journey through post-war Germany. This was not a funeral procession, but a disposal operation. Stalin was panic-stricken by the fear that the Führer's grave, if its location were ever known, would become a pilgrimage site for neo-Nazis, a dangerous symbol. Therefore, the remains had to not merely disappear, they had to be erased from the face of the earth.
First, the boxes were secretly buried in a forest near the town of Rothenow. But when the SMERSH unit responsible for them was relocated, the evidence was dug up and moved along with the troops.
Their new refuge became a closed Soviet military compound in Magdeburg, in East Germany. Here, in a secluded inner courtyard, under an ordinary asphalt slab, the boxes were lowered into the ground once more. The location was anonymous, utterly unremarkable. Only a handful of state security officers knew what lay beneath the feet of the soldiers marching on the parade ground. Thus began their long, silent imprisonment. The years passed. Generations of officers and political leaders in the Kremlin changed, but the secret beneath the Magdeburg soil was impeccably kept. It seemed this terrible relic would remain buried in oblivion forever. But in the late 1960s, this calm came to an end. The Soviet government was preparing to hand over the military compound to the authorities of the GDR. This caused genuine panic in the Kremlin. The head of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, one of the few initiated into the secret, personally reported to General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev there was a real threat that after the transfer of the territory, the Germans might accidentally discover the burial site. The consequences of such an uncovering were unpredictable. Andropov proposed a radical and final solution: to conduct an operation for the complete destruction of the remains. In March 1970, the Politburo of the CPSU Central Committee secretly approved this plan. The operation received the code name Archive. And so, on the night of April 4th, 5th, 1970, the compound in Magdeburg was cordoned off by KGB units. Under the light of car headlights, in deep secrecy, soldiers broke up the asphalt and began to dig. They retrieved 5 wooden boxes, which had almost rotted away over the quarter of a century. Their contents, a mixture of bones, earth, and decayed fabric, were transferred with the utmost care into new, sturdy boxes.
Under heavy guard, they were taken outside the city to a wasteland in the Schönebeck area. There, in a deep ravine, a powerful bonfire was already blazing, prepared in advance. A special commission that had arrived from Moscow to observe was present. KGB officers opened the boxes and poured their contents into the fire. They waited for several hours until the fire had done its work, leaving nothing but ash. This ash was then meticulously collected, ground up, and, according to the official version, scattered to the wind from one of the bridges over the Biederitz River. The only things that survived from the physical existence of Adolf Hitler were a few fragments, a part of the jawbone and a fragment of the skull with a bullet hole. These were preserved as material evidence, placed for storage in the KGB archives and state archives in Moscow. Operation Archive was complete. The 25-year posthumous odyssey of the remains had finally ended. A full stop seemed to have been put on the matter. But it was precisely these preserved fragments that, decades later, would give rise to a new, even more disturbing mystery.
The history of the Führerbunker and Operations Myth and Archive is not just a page from a textbook. It is a multi-layered parable about the nature of power, fear, and how the past continues to influence the present. The first layer is historical. Adolf Hitler died in his bunker. This is an established fact, confirmed by eyewitness accounts, dental expertise, and documents. He did not escape to Argentina or fly to a secret base in Antarctica. His empire collapsed, and he himself chose the path of voluntary departure, abandoning his people to their fate. The second layer is political. Even his death instantly became a weapon in the nascent Cold War. By creating the myth of his escape, Stalin turned his enemy's body into a tool of manipulation. This ghost haunted the world for decades, poisoning minds, spawning conspiracy theories, and serving as a justification for repression. It proves that in high politics, even death can become a variable in the equation of power. But why did the myth of his survival prove so tenacious? This leads us to the third, psychological layer.
Our consciousness struggles to accept that absolute evil could have such a banal, inglorious end, poison and a gunshot in a damp basement. Subconsciously, we expect the monster to have been more cunning, more sophisticated, that it is lurking somewhere. The myth of Hitler escaping justice is a story not so much about him, but about us, about our fear that evil might be elusive.
And finally, the symbolic layer. What is the Führerbunker today? It is an ordinary parking lot in central Berlin. A place where the fates of millions were once decided is now filled with cars. A modest information board is the only reminder. The Germans deliberately chose not to create a memorial here to avoid turning this place into a cult site. It is an attempt to bury not just the concrete, but the memory itself. But can you pave over evil with asphalt? Our investigation is complete, but several questions, as in any good detective story, remain unanswered. For instance, the enigma of the skull fragment stored in Moscow. In 2009, genetic analysis conducted by American scientists established that the bone with the bullet hole belonged to a woman. Whose skull is it? Ava Braun's? Or someone else, whose fate was lost in the chaos of the final days of the assault? This anomaly does not disprove the fact of Hitler's death, proven by his jawbones, but it casts a shadow of doubt on the flawless nature of the entire Soviet investigation. Was this a mistake, or part of a more complex game?
And the main question, by destroying the remains, did we destroy the legacy? Operation Archive was an attempt to erase evil from the material world. But evil is not bones or ashes, it is an idea that, like a virus, can lie dormant in the public consciousness for decades, only to awaken in times of crisis, instability, and rising nationalist sentiment. The history of the Führerbunker is an eternal warning. It is not only about the end of one dictator, but also about how fragile civilization is and how easily it can descend into barbarism. It is a reminder that even when bunkers are destroyed and tyrants are long gone, their shadows continue to walk among us, waiting for their hour. What do you think? Was the destruction of the remains a justified act or a barbaric destruction of historical evidence? What secrets, in your opinion, does the earth beneath the former Reich Chancellery still hide? History never truly ends. It simply goes underground, only to remind us of itself once again.